Epistaxiophobia. For most people, the fear of nosebleeds isn't really about blood. It's about what the nosebleed might mean. People with this fear spend a lot of time monitoring themselves. They worry about dry air, small sensations in their nose, or being in situations where a nosebleed would feel embarrassing or hard to manage. It becomes such a big issue that the fear later centers on anticipation, the constant, what if I get a nosebleed, instead of dealing with the nosebleed when and if it ever happens. The problem is that nosebleeds are common and unpredictable. They can happen because of dry indoor air, allergies, or irritation, and sometimes there is no clear cause at all. That lack of control feeds the fear. Treatment usually focuses on dialing back those assumptions and helping people tolerate the discomfort without jumping to worst-case conclusions. Porphyrophobia. People with the fear of the color purple rarely talk about their fear using color theory or symbolism. Instead, it shows up in how they act. They might choose different routes in stores or pause before entering gardens. They notice packaging, signs, and clothing in ways most of us never would. For them, purple is something to watch out for and avoid, even though its appearance in someone's life is almost impossible to control. This fear is usually linked to associations rather than logical reasons. Purple has long been linked to power, mystery, authority, and the unknown. If a stressful or traumatic event happens in a setting where purple stands out, the brain can start treating the color as a warning instead of decoration. So much so that even seeing or thinking about purple can cause panic symptoms like dizziness, shortness of breath, or nausea. Ranidaphobia. 99% of people think frogs and toads are gross, and that's usually where it ends. Their disgust doesn't automatically turn into fear. People with Ranidaphobia don't just have an ick when it comes to frogs. Their bodies react before their brains have time to catch up, leading to full-on anxiety. Someone might avoid parks after a bout of rain, stay away from ponds, or feel on edge in places where the sight of a frog is common. The fear often forms early, sometimes after a single scary childhood moment, or by watching how other people react, or without a clear memory at all. Over time, though, the brain starts to believe the response and repeats it automatically, even though frogs and toads aren't dangerous. I mean, I guess unless they're poisonous. Then they are. I still think they're cool. Scopophobia. Most people feel uneasy if someone stares at them for a long time. We might shift around, look away, and then move on. For people with scopophobia, though, that uneasy feeling never really goes away. They often feel watched, judged, or examined, even during everyday moments like waiting in line or passing someone on the street. When this fear sets in, people often begin to avoid situations that make them feel uneasy. People with this phobia will start to make their world smaller and smaller by always walking with their heads down. They'll rush interactions or avoid social spaces entirely. Just the thought of going out can eventually be so scary that it leads to panic attacks. Not because anything dangerous is happening, but because the brain has learned to see attention as something to avoid. Sidonglobophobia. Cotton shows up in bathrooms, clinics, makeup kits, and first aid drawers, and no one gives it a second thought. But for some, the fluffy stuff's texture, resistance, and even the sound it makes when it's pulled apart can trigger an immediate stress response. This fear can form after a bad experience or from linking cotton with dirt, germs, or discomfort. Even if someone knows cotton isn't dangerous, their reaction usually stays the same. Just seeing or touching cotton can bring on anxiety, and sometimes panic or distress. And since most people see cotton as completely harmless, those who are afraid of it are often too embarrassed to talk about it, making it easier to hide the fear than face it. Spheksophobia. Most of us probably have some form of this one. Wasps are scary for a reason, especially if you've ever had the misfortune of meeting one up close. Their stings burn. They can sting more than once, and they don't back off the way people expect insects to. That alone is enough to leave a lasting impression. But for some people, the fear goes beyond that. Something as simple as hearing something that might be a wasp can make people with Spheksophobia freeze, panic, or want to run away, even if nothing is actually there. News stories and warnings from adults can make this reaction worse, especially if the fear started early. And eventually it becomes less about the wasp itself and more about how quickly everything spirals once one shows up. Syngenesophobia. You have in-laws, and then you have in-laws. For some people, the idea of seeing relatives creates tension before the visit begins. In fact, the entire dynamic feels loaded the moment relatives are involved. Even a group chat notification can bring back the same tension as a holiday dinner. Syngenesophobia usually develops from old history. Long ago arguments, unresolved resentment, or memories that surface the second everyone is in the same room again. Some people feel like they lose their privacy around family, or they slip back into roles they worked hard to outgrow. Others avoid relatives because there's something they don't want uncovered, or because past mistreatment still sits too close to the surface. The problem is that avoidance has a way of spreading. Over time, it can cut people off not just from stress, but from support too, even when they want connection and don't quite know how to get it. Frigophobia. The fear of the cold, or freezing to death, usually starts off very slowly. People may notice an unusual coldness in their hands or feet and start checking themselves repeatedly, worried that something is seriously wrong. As their fear grows, their actions change too. Extra layers of clothing go on, fires or heat sources become the safest place in the house, and a lot of people will only bathe in the warmest part of the day. For most people, the real worry becomes that they're dying or that they could be freezing to death. Once mostly reported in Chinese community cases, a study in Sri Lanka found 109 patients with the same thing. Most of them were women, and some already lived with other specific phobias. Which makes sense when you realize that in these areas, traditional medical ideas frame health as a balance between hot and cold in the body, and too much cold is treated as a serious threat. Families repeat that message, and their whole diets and daily routines are built around it. Uranophobia. The fear of heaven or the sky can show up in a few different ways. Some people feel uneasy under a wide open sky, especially at night. Others might feel their chest tighten during events like eclipses, meteor showers, or even just talking about space. While this phobia is not officially recognized as its own diagnosis, manuals like the DSM-5, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, state that the feelings that accompany it are very real. People can experience dizziness, racing thoughts, or a strong urge to go inside and stay there. For some, the fear is connected to religion and worries about the afterlife. For others, it comes from feeling small in a universe that feels too big to understand. Should it become debilitating, therapists usually tackle it with a step-by-step type program, tailored to the individual themselves. Lachanophobia. One unusual way to face this fear of vegetables is by smiling at it. I kid you not. In dialectical behavior therapy, people use a technique called half-smiling. That means they think about what scares them while letting their face relax into a gentle smile. This simple exercise teaches the body that dread and calmness can exist together. Taking care of this fear sooner rather than later is incredibly important, since people with this phobia can start to avoid the produce section or only buy beige packaged foods because seeing green on their plate makes them anxious. So, if a pile of broccoli makes you nervous, that small half smile can actually be the first step toward feeling better. Gymnophobia. Gymnos is the Greek word for naked, and it gave us gymnasium, going all the way back to the days when athletes trained without clothes. Gymnophobia is the modern flip side, if you will, or fear of nudity that shows up very differently from person to person. Some people only feel uneasy in locker rooms or communal showers. Others tense up alone in their own homes. You can be fine with your own body, but be unable to handle it if someone else is undressed. And it gets worse for anyone who's ashamed of their scars or who grew up with a lot of teasing. Add strict cultural or religious rules about modesty, or a history of unwanted sexual attention, and nudity turns it into the spotlight nobody ever wanted. Geniophobia. This is the fear of chins. Yes, chins. Of all the things a brain could latch onto, this one targets the lower half of the face. It can kick in during the most ordinary parts of the day. Looking in the mirror, lining up for a selfie, joining a video call where everyone's jawline is right there on screen. Some people become hyper aware of angles and lighting. Others start avoiding photos altogether, or steer clear of people with very sharp or very prominent chins. Even simple things like getting a haircut, sitting across from someone at dinner, or meeting a new doctor can turn into a terrible and loaded moment. Triskaidekaphobia. The number 13 comes with baggage. Some hotels skip the 13th floor, some airlines leave out row 13, and some streets just jump from house number 12 to 14. It even ended up with its own horror franchise. And it's nothing new. Loki crashed a Norse feast as the 13th guest. And if you know the Christian Bible, you'll remember there were 13 people at the Last Supper, Jesus and his 12 disciples. That mix of religion, legend, and timing left the number with a reputation that's never been ideal. Unfortunately for people who live with this fear, the number still shows up everywhere. You can't escape it. House numbers, email addresses, calendar dates, it always finds a way in. The only real way to treat it is through gradual exposure and steady coping tools, so the brain stops matching 13 with impending doom. Peniaphobia. We all know someone who balks every time they have to buy groceries or fill up their tanks. In fact, financial planners probably deal with peniaphobics the most. They're the guys who will withdraw every cent out of the stock market during a rough patch to protect themselves. And time again, their accounts would have ended up with thousands of dollars more if they had just left their money where it was. People with this fear of poverty aren't just careful with money, they live in a constant, what if I lose it all mode. They overstock their cupboards, buy extra bags of rice just in case, and really hate spending, even on the things they can easily afford. Therapists usually find that they grew up in real hardship or watched their parents juggle bills, and that the old financial uncertainty never left. Chronomentrophobia. The fear of clocks, or timepieces, actually has less to do with clocks and more to do with how our brains can take almost anything and turn it into a face. Look at your closest watch, preferably analog for this to actually work. Once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. Those winding holes or screw points can look exactly like eyes. A keyhole or dial starts to look like a mouth. The phenomenon of seeing faces in everyday objects is scientifically called pareidolia, and it happens because our brains use the same visual system to spot those pretend faces as they do for real ones, the same way people see faces in wood grain, power outlets, or the front of a car. That's why a mantle clock with googly eyes can seem watchful or even a little scary, whether you're someone with chronomentrophobia or just a child trying to fall asleep in the same room. Cherophobia. People with the fear of happiness often avoid things that seem too fun. They might turn down invitations to parties or concerts because feelings of happiness can seem risky. There's even something known as the fear of happiness scale, used in psychology research, with statements like, disasters often follow good fortune, excessive joy has bad consequences, and I prefer not to be too joyful because sadness usually follows. When those ideas feel true, happiness starts to look reckless. So they turn down opportunities that might improve their lives, keep their celebrations muted, and avoid situations where there might be too much joy. Looking in from the outside, you and I might see negativity. For them, it feels like self-preservation. Cacophobia. People with this fear of ugly things may fixate on the idea that something or someone looks wrong in a way they find overwhelming. Some direct this fear at themselves, becoming very critical of their own perceived flaws. For others, it's about the world around them. Certain faces, scars, animals, or places can simply be too disturbing to look at. What counts as ugly can also be completely subjective, which makes it even harder to understand. Two people with cacophobia might react very differently to the exact same thing. There are, however, common threads behind it, like growing up in a family where someone's looks were always judged, or coming from a history where someone's looks or appearance were always judged. In those cases, therapy often focuses on two fronts at once: tackling the fear itself with exposure work, while also working on body image and self-esteem so that ugly slowly loses its power. Barophobia. If you have the fear of gravity, the ceiling can feel heavy, as if there's too much weight above you. Tall buildings stop being impressive and start to look like stacks that could fall at any moment. You might always pick ground floor rooms, avoid glass elevators, and stick close to the inside walls on stairs because being near the edge just feels wrong. Even simple things like standing near a balcony rail or the edge of a train platform are a no-no. This doesn't mean someone with barophobia failed science class. They know buildings are built to stay up. The trouble is, their body just doesn't believe it. So every decision, from which way to walk to where to sleep, basically focuses on feeling safe and grounded. Bathmophobia. Bathmophobia is a bit like barophobia in that both give you an intense fear of falling, but that's where the similarities stop. Bathmophobia is all about stairs and steep slopes. The worry is very specific. People can be scared of tumbling down a flight of stairs, catching a foot in the gap between steps, or losing their balance halfway up a steep hill. Some are just as nervous about going up as they are about going down, especially if the stairs are narrow, slippery, or look worn out. Like other specific phobias, it often starts with one bad experience or a close call, and then becomes worse and worse until stairs feel unsafe almost every time. And it's surprisingly common. About 1 in 10 adults and about 1 in 5 teenagers are affected at some point in life. Ergasiophobia. The fear of work or tasks, sometimes also called ergophobia, is not about one specific office or boss, but the whole idea of having to show up and perform. People suffering from this phobia might lie awake the night before a shift, replaying every mistake they could make, then call in sick rather than face it. It can also appear as procrastination. Think of someone who's always drifting between jobs, because for this person, filling out applications or sitting in an interview is simply unbearable. The fear is out of proportion to the real risk, sticking around for months at a time, and it often overlaps with burnout, depression, or other anxieties, which makes it harder to spot. Papaphobia. If you grew up surrounded by Catholic imagery, the Pope stands out as an important figure. He draws large crowns, follows strict ceremonies, wears long robes, and speaks with great authority. For sufferers, the fear might be tied to the man himself, to the office he holds, or to any memories they might have that are linked to church and family. They might avoid church buildings completely, skip events that involve clergy, or feel their chest tighten when his face appears on the news. It's not always obvious either. A person can hold a job, pay bills, and function well, yet still feel their mind go blank or their heart race the moment the Pope comes up. Catagelophobia. If you grew up in a home where every mistake became a joke, or if you spent years as the target of teasing at school, you quickly learn that attention is dangerous. People with the fear of being ridiculed can be very tuned in to people's reactions and body language. For example, when they see a raised eyebrow or hear a whisper, or someone laughing in the corner of the room, it can feel like they are the joke, even when they're not. Some people become people pleasers, doing anything to avoid criticism. Others go the opposite way and withdraw, skipping parties, group projects, or situations where they could be put on the spot. They do everything they can to stay out of the spotlight. Pogonophobia. For every person who treats their beard like it's a part of the family, there's someone who cannot stand being near one. Pogonophobia can show up as a mild aversion or as a full body reaction the second stubble enters the room. Some people trace it back to a bad memory with a bearded person. Others say the problem's not knowing what's going on under all that hair. When the lower half of a face disappears, so does a lot of the expression we rely on. Whatever the reason, a crowded barbershop, a hipster coffee shop, or a family gathering full of uncles in this day and age just doesn't feel as non-threatening as most of us think it does. Also, fun fact, I talked about this one on the very first List 25 episode that I appeared on camera on, so check that one out. Koumpounophobia. If you've ever wondered why Apple loves clean glass screens and almost no physical controls, there's a story there. Steve Jobs once apparently admitted that he had a fear of buttons, and that odd little afflictions supposedly light up neatly with the rise of touchscreens. However, Koumpounophobia can show up in smaller, less world-changing ways, too. Some people can't stand the feel of plastic buttons under their fingers and will avoid shirts that use them. Others are convinced old buttons are filthy and won't touch sewing boxes, thrift store clothes, or coats with loose fasteners. A few people are less worried about germs and more worried about choking, especially if they, or a kid they knew, once got a button stuck where it shouldn't go. If this fear is not addressed, it can get worse until buttons on clothes, remotes, or even toys all seem off limits. Geniophobia. Whether it's a crippling fear of injuring a knee or just seeing one, for a geniophobe, knees are something to be treated with care, preferably while being covered up. And do not even get started on knees touching other knees, because that feels almost like sacrilege. People with this fear avoid kneeling, dislike crossing their legs, and feel uneasy in crowds where someone might bump into them. Some are bothered by how knees look or feel, the shape, the bony parts, or the way the skin folds when bending. They often keep shorts and skirts hidden away because seeing their own knees makes them uncomfortable. Even a simple sports highlight reel can make them clutch their own knees and look away. My knees are not here, sorry. Clutch their own knees and look away. Treatment often involves talking about the fear and slowly facing it. The goal is to get the sufferer used to seeing knees, or even moving their own, so that every random bump doesn't set off their internal alarms all at once. So yeah, for every normal fear, like spiders or flying, there are people out there wrestling with knees, buttons, and beards, just trying to get through the day. Makes plain old stage fright feel pretty manageable, doesn't it? So, do you think you're close to getting any of those yourself, or do you already have one? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to keep going, check out our related video, 25 phobias you might have and not even know it. Trust me, there is always something worse. As always, thank you guys so much for watching and supporting the channel. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. And I'll see you again next time. Unless you're afraid of beards. I probably won't then. So, because, yeah.